everybody, and welcome to your next installment of Note Taking for AP Government. Today we will be covering the federal bureaucracy. Today is actually our last note taking session together. So this is maybe the last time you'll hear my voice unless you come to the AP review meetings or something like that. From here we go to so we're going to do another College Board activity next Tuesday and Wednesday, and then Thursday you're going to have your assessment on the executive branch and federal bureaucracy, which will be an argumentative essay. And next Friday we'll start reviewing for the AP test. And if you're not taking the AP test, I have a little mini project for you to do. So our time together is quickly wrapping up, as we were told you guys are done May 13th, which means I can only assign something for the last time on May 6th. And just a reminder that AP test is May 11th. So here we go, the federal bureaucracy. What is the federal bureaucracy? And a lot of people struggle with understanding what the bureaucracy is. And I think the biggest reason is because you just aren't aware of it. It's not something that you learn when you're younger, and it's not something that a lot of adults even know about. So it's just hard to understand because it's not like a common knowledge thing. So what is the bureaucracy and what does it do? Well, it is a complex web of federal agencies. And these federal agencies' main job is to enforce the law. So you know that the executive branch's job is to make sure that all of the laws passed by Congress are enforced. And the way the president makes sure that they are enforced is through these federal agencies. So they ensure that they ensure that policies and programs are carried out. I think of them as the enforcers. So, for example, the EPA. The EPA's job isn't to come up with regulations, but to make sure that everybody is following the regulations that were set by Congress. When you have emissions, when you have how much can be dumped into water, that's all regulated by the EPA, and their job is to make sure that companies and people follow those guidelines. Okay? So when you look at the bureaucracy, if you look at this, it has the president right here. And then think of this as an umbrella, and all these different agencies are actually underneath the president. Because the executive branch consists of the president is the leader of all of these agencies. Okay? So think of it that way. We're going to break down what the different agencies are. So the first one is that independent regulatory agency. Regulatory, which means to regulate. So they are created by Congress. They are created by Congress. Okay, and they are independent of the executive departments, but they are part. Okay, they have a fixed term, they can't be fired, and they kind of act like the watchdog of the federal government. Okay. Okay, sorry, I paused there. I'm trying to decide, because the box is so small, how much I want to write. So they are independent, but still part of the executive. Okay. Fixed term, can't be fired. And that's important because that means if the president isn't happy with what they're doing, he can't take it out on this group. Some examples of this are the FDA, TSA, SEC. Okay, so Security Exchange. The TSA is the Travel Security, FDA, Food and Drug Administration. So really what you want to ask yourself for this group is, is it regulating? Or punishing? If the answer is yes, then it is an independent regulatory agency. Another good one to think of is the FCC, right? They manage the airways, okay? All right. Now on to the independent executive agency. This is, because it is executive, right? It's directly under the executive branch, which means it is influenced by the president. And they can be appointed and fired. Okay, they can be appointed and fired. Examples are the EPA, the CIA, NASA, although I'm not going to put NASA down because they're technically not a governmental group anymore. Peace Corps. So these different groups are directly influenced by the president, and they have the capacity to enforce what the president wants to happen. So that's why, if you've been looking at the news, how they say they're rolling back emission testing, they're rolling back all these different standards when it comes to the environment. And that's because the EPA is not a regulatory agency. It's not deciding what each company can put into the air. It is an executive agency, which means that it does what the executive branch says it has to do. So that's the difference between the two. The regulatory is going to be able to make decisions. The Food and Drug Administration can decide this drug is not good for our people. We are not going to sell it in the United States. They don't have to go through the president to do that. Whereas the EPA, the president can say, I'm not going to enforce this emissions test anymore, and then the EPA has to follow suit because they are directly under the president. Okay? So this means that they are under control of the president. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, make sure you comment and I'll answer your questions. Okay? Government corporations, it is a hybrid of those two things. So it is a government agency / corporation. Okay, so this is kind of a twofer. Examples of this are Metra and Amtrak. Okay, so what that means is that you have stakeholders in the company. So you have people who run Metra, but the government is also a stakeholder. Okay, which means the government helps fund Metra. The government can have a say in how the trains run, but also this corporation, the people who own the company, also have a say. Okay, we've already talked about the White House office and the executive office. So these are the people in the room with the president. Okay, and you can, examples of this would be the Chief of Staff, First Lady. Okay, this is definitely hire and fire at will. People have no say. And who gets these positions. Which is why for Trump you see a lot of his family, because he gets to decide who works for him. Okay, so for the cabinet, we've talked about the cabinet before, but the cabinet is considered a bureaucratic agency because they work underneath the president and their job is to inform the president of everything that's going on. And also their job is to advise and to help Congress and the president make legislation to pass executive orders that will benefit those various areas. So for the cabinet, it is appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, okay, their job is to advise okay. So some examples of this, I'm actually just going to list them all. I think this is why I paused for a second. So there are 15 positions. Oh, I put it down here. Okay, so just one way to think of the cabinet is like a school. And in a school, you have a principal, you have a secretary, an undersecretary. I'm saying it backwards. Sorry. In a school, right, you have the cabinet member who's going to be your principal, and then you have the undersecretary, so the person who serves directly underneath the principal, that would be like your assistant principal, and then you have the bureaucracy itself. And so the people who work underneath the head of the cabinet and the undersecretary, they are very hard to fire. They're like teachers in a tenured position. It's very hard to move or to fire those people. And so if you're in those upper positions, if you are the cabinet member, then the president can fire you. But if you serve underneath, if you work for that specific cabinet, then it is actually very hard to fire you. That's just a side note. I'm just going to list all of them. I'm going to start up in the examples because I have a feeling I'm going to run out of space. So we have the state, Secretary of Treasury, Defense, Education, Interior, Housing and Urban Development, that's Ben Carson right now. He has a really interesting life story if you're ever looking for someone to look up. Health and Human Services, Labor, Commerce, Homeland Security, that's a new one. That one's relatively new that Congress made. Energy is relatively new as well. And then finally, Agriculture. So these are the 15 different cabinets that we have. And then in each cabinet, you have someone who is the secretary of that. So the secretary of Education is Betsy DeVos, and she leads the entire education branch. Okay? I feel like my handwriting got a little sloppy there. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, moving on. So those are the different bureaucratic agencies, and again, they all work underneath the president, and their job is to help the president enforce the various legislation, including their own legislation. The president has control over a lot of the bureaucratic agencies, but as we discovered, not all of them. All right, the merit system. So the merit system was actually set up because of the merit system was actually set up because of Jackson, because there was too much going on where people were getting jobs that they were not qualified for. So the bureaucracy is based on a merit system, which means you have to be hired based on qualifications and promoted based on performance. what actually put this into place was called the Pendleton Act, which you should know. And this means government job must be awarded based on merit. Okay. And this also means government employees can't be fired or demoted for political reasons. So this kind of does away with the idea of once a president comes in, they get rid of everybody that is working in the executive branch to hire their own people. This allows people who have experience, who have been in positions for a while, to stay in that position. And again, that doesn't apply to like your cabinet members because those do come in and out when the president comes and goes, but it definitely protects your independent regulatory agencies, and it definitely protects the people at the bottom of the bureaucracy. What is the main effect of the Pendleton Act? It's going to create what's called competitive service written exams. Okay, which means that you have to be qualified. They actually make you show that you are qualified to have that position. And the government definitely gets around it if there's somebody they really want to be in a position. They can actually cater exams to the person they want to get the position, but they do have to show that they have experience. So why is the bureaucracy considered part of the executive branch? Because they're carrying out the laws. Where do most bureaucrats work? There are approximately 4.1 million bureaucrats. Okay, 4.1 million. 2.7 are military. Okay, they help the president enforce. I'm sorry. I jumped ahead. 2.7 million are civilians. So those are the people that are in those different agencies like the EPA, CIA, those different groups. 1.4 are military. Sorry about that. Okay. So why is the bureaucracy scary? Why are people always complain about bureaucrats and they get upset about it? It's because there are no elections for positions. The American people have no say over these people that are the ones that say how the laws are followed. So the people that work in the bureaucracy are the ones who take the legislation from Congress. Let's say Congress says we're going to have a more cohesive way to make sure that you fly safely. So they're going to then come up with laws like you can only bring 3 ounces on the airplane. You have to take off your shoes when you go through the metal detectors. They are the ones that come up with those actual regulations that American citizens have to follow. So people get upset that we don't elect those bureaucratic agents, but they get to directly influence our lives. Okay, they view the bureaucrats as lazy, wasteful, incompetent. So they think the bureaucrats are lazy. And the main reason that they think this is because they don't see a lot come out of the bureaucracy. And one of the main reasons that is because of redundancy. So you have, let's say, the cabinet, the Secretary to Agriculture, right? And they're going to come up with ways in order to protect farmers. But then you have an independent regulatory agency, the FDA, who's saying how much corn you can sell on whatever market. And then you have someone from the EPA saying that you can only use so much emission when you're transporting corn. So because you have all these different groups working on the same content, on the same laws, it causes this redundancy. So people are doing the same thing. It causes conflict because the groups want to do things differently. It causes duplication. It causes waste. And so that's why the bureaucracy has a hard time running. Also, incumbent congressmen will blame the bureaucracy because the bureaucracy doesn't have a face. Okay, so incumbent congressmen blame the bureaucracy for not enforcing the laws the way they should. But the real reason they blame the bureaucracy is because the bureaucracy has no face. There's no one that you can say, oh, oops, I don't know what happened there. That person's clearly to blame, right? Sorry, I might have spelled that wrong. Because there's no face to blame, there's no specific person to blame, that means that there's no one to defend it. So they're not going to get any pushback from anybody. Okay? And then finally, challengers love to make false claim about the waste. Oops, I lost it out. Which again ties back to which then goes back to there's no face, there's no one to defend. Okay? These are just some vocabs. Red tape is all the hoops that you have to jump through in order to get everything passed in order to enforce laws. Redundancy, again, the same groups cover the same topic. Waste is the fact that you're going to have different groups discussing the same bill, enforcing the same law. So all of these words are just words that you could use to explain the bureaucracy. All right, the Clinton administration. The reason the Clinton administration is because it's one of the first times that they actually reduced the bureaucratic agencies. So he ordered a huge review of the structure and performance of the agencies, and because of this, it caused more privatization and reliance on free market and less responsibility on the federal government. Okay? So because of the major review of the bureaucracy, it causes more privatization and reliance on free market. And then 2, it shifts from federal to state government, shifts responsibilities from the federal to state governments. So basically think of this as reduced size of bureaucracy. And now you'll see this happen every once in a while. I forgot a U. Bloop, bloop. There should be a U right there, sorry. Okay, and you will see this happen more now too, where when people go into office, they try and reduce the size of the bureaucracy. All right, bureaucracy's impact on the legislative process. All right, because members of Congress do not have the education to deal with the scientific details that are required to implement the legislation that they push forward, agent bureaucrats are often asked to do this for them, or they're asked for advice. So you're going to have the bureaucratic agencies called upon by the legislative branch in order to assist in writing the legislation, and that way, too, when that legislation reaches the bureaucrats know exactly how to enforce that. Okay, so agencies will be called in for advice to Congress. Okay, so they'll be called in and asked for help. They will assist in writing legislation. And this can go two ways. The bureaucratic agency could delay legislation. If they don't like what's coming down from Congress, if they don't like the direction they're taking it, they could actually cause legislation to be delayed by giving them different advice or kind of dragging things out and hoping that the legislative branch stops whatever bill they're pushing forward. But on the flip side, they represent the preferences of interest groups that they are allied with during the lawmaking process, so they might actually help push forward. So they could delay legislation, or they could help push forward legislation. And help interest groups. Okay, so it could go one of two directions. How does the president control? They appoint the key figures who direct. The agency. Okay. And also, they are going to choose those people based on their own ideology. So they'll have the same ideology as the president. So the president will make sure those people think like them. How does Congress control? As we've talked about before, Congress holds those purse strings, so they are the ones that appropriate the money that runs the bureaucracy. So if Congress doesn't give them money, then they don't run. Congress also has to approve the different agencies' creation. So when that Secretary of Homeland Security agencies approves creation of agencies, when the Secretary of Homeland Security, when that whole division was made, Congress had to approve making that. Congress authorizes spending, and Congress can call bureaucratic agents in and say, "Hey, how'd you spend this money?" They can call them in and ask them. They can have congressional investigations where they'll say, "How come you didn't enforce this law?" Or how come you asked for $6 million and you only use two? So they do have those congressional investigations. They can impeach officials. I'm running out of room here. So they can impeach those officials if they found them to commit a criminal act. And they have to give committee clearance. Okay, so they have to clear those bureaucratic agency committees. All right. So what makes a bureaucratic so powerful? It's what's called discretionary. Oh, I totally misspelled that. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay. Discretionary authority. And this is the power that bureaucrats have to take legislation, interpret it, and turn it into the actual laws that U.S. citizens follow. So again, the legislative branch passes a law saying that buses should have to stop before railroad tracks. That goes to your bureaucratic agencies where they decide what is the actual law. Well, the actual law is that the bus must stop before the railroad track, must open up the door, listen for a train before crossing those tracks. Congress doesn't come up with those little itty bitty details. It's the bureaucratic agencies, and they have the discretionary authority to interpret the laws and executive orders passed and enforce them to the best of their ability to make sure that those laws are followed. Okay, so discretionary authority is very important. This is what gives them power. All right, the Iron Triangle. Because they kind of eliminated lobbying and special interest groups, I'm not positive if you'll see this on your test, so I just wanted to briefly touch on it. The whole idea of the Iron Triangle is that Congress, interest groups, and the bureaucracies depend on each other. Congress needs the bureaucratic agencies in order to regulate the way that they want them to, but the bureaucratic agencies need Congress in order to get the funding that they need, which you can see on this triangle, if you're wondering why I'm not writing it down. And interest groups depend on Congress to pass laws that support their issues, but Congress depends on special interest groups for electoral support, and so that's going to be money. Interest groups donate a lot of money to Congress. And then, which one did I miss? And then you could see in the middle, they want friendly legislation oversight for those interest groups, congressional support via lobby, so those bureaucratic agencies can get money because they'll lobby Congress. So they all rely on each other. And so that's why it's called an Iron Triangle, because they support each other. Okay? And then an issue network is when you have a group that mutually beneficial to each other. So it's not necessarily a triangle, but it's more that they need to work together. This is still Iron Triangle. So an example of an issue network, you can't see what's on my screen. An example of an issue network would be healthcare, right? So healthcare is an issue that many groups believe in, right? And so you're going to have, let me think here. You're going to have your Secretary of Health and Human Services, right? You're going to have interest groups like the medical, I believe it's MDA, Medical Doctors Association, who's interested in healthcare. You're going to have regulatory and independent regulatories. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is going to be interested in healthcare issues. You're going to have all these different groups. So this is an interest group. Okay, this is agency. So an issue network was when all these different groups seek to support each other. They want public interest. They're out there to support public interest, not their own. And these are groups of people that are going to work together. Okay. So this is going to be when they work together for a common issue. Okay, so when the idea of socialized healthcare came down, you had these different groups working together with the ultimate goal to get healthcare for all. They weren't supporting each other, trying to get legislation back. They were trying to come up with the best scenario for the American people. All right, that completes our federal bureaucracy notes. I hope that you understand them. I hope that you guys are all doing well. And like I said before, I'm sorry that they have pushed off your graduation and are doing that virtual graduation. I hope that you all I hope that you all saw Dr. Kate's message to you guys. And yeah, I'm going to add really quick. So that they work together, and then this is at the expense of the general public. Okay, so the people aren't part of this. The people are thought of in an issue network. Okay, that is all for real. I hope you're all well. I'll talk to you later. I'm definitely going to do a Zoom for reviewing for that AP test. I'll probably Zoom one more time, which is the whole class, to check on people. Other than that, we're done with note-taking, guys. It's got to feel good. You guys are getting close to being done with your senior year. Talk to you later.